Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today I am so excited to bring you guys the first deck tech with one of the new legendary creatures from War of the Spark. And there's a number of them floating out there. Some of them seem really cool, but none speaks to me more than Krenko 10th Street Kingpin. Now, the original Krenko Mob Boss, was one of the first commander decks I ever built, and was one of my favorite decks. I absolutely love the flavor of goblins. Some of the art on those old goblin cards is just amazing. It's so good, and even the lore and everything behind Krenko, I loved everything about it, except for one thing, and it was the kind of feast or famine nature of the deck. I don't really like to play decks that just win super fast. I also don't like to play decks that don't do anything, and a lot of time with Krenko, he would either go off and just dominate and win the game, or he'd get killed a couple times. I couldn't give him haste, and I would kind of just sit back and didn't get to do much. So as much as I love the deck, it was a little bit at times too powerful, and other times I feel like I wasn't in games. And I feel like this new Krenko, while I think it's very safe to say nowhere near as powerful as Krenko Mob Boss, kind of brings a new spin on Krenko, and in all honesty, I think could make for a more consistent commander. Definitely less explosive, but maybe a little bit more consistent. Before we get too far, let's take a look at Krenko and this new Krenko, 10th Street Kingpin. Alright, so he is 2 in a red for obviously a legendary creature. He's a 1/2. Whenever he attacks, you get to put a +1 counter onto him, and then you make 1/1 goblins equal to his power. So this is interesting for a number of reasons. One, similar to old Krenko, you want to be able to give him haste, whereas old Krenko wanted to tap. This is when you actually need to swing, so he becomes much more vulnerable. But he does slowly make himself bigger. There's a few different directions. Clearly you want to have some type of weird combination of Voltron and token deck. Unfortunately, it's mono red, so +1 counter synergies probably aren't going to be a great direction to go. And while there are a number of proliferate cards that could work well, to be completely honest, proliferating those +1 counters is kind of inefficient. So what I decided to do is take just a full-on goblin build with some equipment in there. So that way, really with a lot of goblin synergies, he's just gonna go so well with. But not only that, there are goblin synergies that allow you to pump him as well, which I'll get into in a little bit. So you combine that with different equipments and stuff like that, all of a sudden you have a board full of regular goblins, goblin tokens, and as anybody who has played goblins before knows, things can get out of hand fast with that. So looking at the creatures, there's 26, and 23 of those are gonna be goblins. Goblins are just one of those tribes that the more you play, really the more you benefit. You want to go heavy into goblins to get those synergies, so that way some of the commons and uncommons that don't seem super overwhelming, when combined with other boards full of goblins, become super scary. The first two I'm going to point out kind of are for the same reason, and it's Goblin Chieftain and Goblin War Chief. They give goblins haste, and again, like I said, we want to be able to give our commander haste. When Krenko doesn't have haste and he has to sit around for a turn, we're not immediately benefiting. And while he is nowhere near as threatening as Krenko Mob Boss, so he's not going to just be immediately hated off as fast, at least to this point it doesn't look like it, it can still be kind of, you don't want to just let him sit around for a turn and hope nobody removes him. So anything that can give him haste. We have plenty of haste enablers, but to be able to put that onto a goblin, which we already want, is perfect. Speaking of not wanting our commander to get hated out, another great card is Goblin Chirurgeon. Now, Goblin Chirurgeon is such a powerful card, especially in a deck that's going to have goblin tokens, because it lets you sack a goblin and regenerate a creature. Essentially, this just means if people start trying to destroy your commander, you can just get rid of one of those tokens you just made and bring them back. And at some point, people aren't going to be wasting removal spells unless it's an exile effect if you're just going to bring it right back. It's a really powerful effect, especially because you can use it on itself. Meaning, if you have a bunch of tokens, this can really just let you keep your board safe. Another card that will be zero surprise, considering I've mentioned him like 5 times already, is Krenko Mob Boss, the original. I really like the idea of getting to play Krenko in the 99. Anytime I played a goblin deck, Krenko was always at the head of it, Krenko Mob Boss was. So now getting to play this other Krenko, putting him in the 99 is really exciting to me, because you get that explosion and everything, and when you draw it, it's going to be exciting. You can have these big turns. But at the same time, it not being at the head of the deck, you're not trying to destroy everyone as fast. I feel like it's a more, a more casual way to experience that whole Krenko experience with him in the 99. This next one is so good in this deck, and that is Mog Raider. This lets you sacrifice a goblin to give a creature +1/+1. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit later because there's a couple cards that synergize well with this, but anybody who plays Commander, I guess maybe most Magic formats know, sack outlets are super powerful. Like if a card just lets you sack something for no benefit, there's times where you would want this. And the fact is this lets you, I just mentioned Goblin Chirurgeon that's going to let you sack things to regenerate creatures. This lets you sack a goblin to give a creature +1/+1. What this essentially reads as is if you have just a board full of goblin tokens, you can sack all of them, pump your commander all the way up, swing, and get all those tokens back. Might seem like you're not netting much, but when we run cards, like some of the enter the battlefield effects I'll get into later, this could be either game ending or put you in a commanding position. Speaking of those enter the battlefield effects, other than Krenko mob bosses will be the least surprising card in this deck, and that is Perforos. Perforos, in any token deck that has red, you have to run it. It is so powerful, and especially in a deck like this. And what I really like about it, if anybody's played against Perforos, it's one of those cards where it's very obvious if you throw in 10 cards at once, 10 creatures at once, that it has that explosive effect. But the insane thing is, even if you're only doing a couple creatures at a time, it really dwindles down life totals. And its effect in this deck is great because at its worst, with our commander, you might be getting 2, maybe 3 goblins. That's still doing significant damage. And if we're able to get equipment onto our Krenko and have other synergies out, again, like most times, Perforos is out, it could just end the game. The last creature I want to talk about is Spikeshot Elder. This is kind of just redundancy with our commander. And I really do enjoy when I build decks, if I have a commander-centered deck, I guess you have a lot of goblin synergies that you can fall back on if your commander gets hated out, but I do like having that redundancy, and Spikeshot Elder lets you pay 3 mana, and what you do is you deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Now, it's only got 1 power, but with all the equipment we have and all the kind of power buffing synergies we have for Krenko, same applies to this. It's also a goblin, and it's also really good. Next up, we're going to look at the artifacts. There's 23. Again, it's a monocolored deck, so a high artifact count should be surprising to nobody. Yeah, and basically, especially in mono red, you really need artifacts to supplement for both ramp and card draw. But specifically in this deck, we have a lot of equipment that we want to buff up our Krenko and get all those tokens. First one I'm going to talk about is Blackblade Reforged. It's so powerful, and it's really, you only want to equip this to legendary creatures because the equip cost otherwise is so expensive. But when you're equipping it to a legendary, really not that bad. It's only 3 mana to equip. And on top of that, it gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Now, obviously we're mono red, so it's not like we're running a green deck getting a ton of lands into play. But you should still be able to hit a decent number of land drops, even if you get stuck at 4 or 5 lands. That's still +4 or +5. That's still an additional 4 or 5 goblins that are going to get just thrown out on the board because of this. And there is a good amount of ramp. We'll get into the lands, we'll get into some of the ramp packages later, and you'll see that this could be kind of a game-changing card. This next one I love so much. It is a Blade of the Blood Chief, and it's whenever a creature dies, equipped creature gets +1/+1. Now a vampire, so I don't get the extra benefit, unfortunately, but that doesn't really matter. I already mentioned all those sack outlets we have. We have a lot of effects in this deck that really want us to mass sack creatures. Now essentially with Blade of the Blood Chief and a card like the Mog Raider I just talked about, you start sacking tokens, your commander's going to get huge, and you're just going to make so many goblins. The next 2 cards kind of have a similar effect on our commander, while are slightly different, and it's Coat of Arms and Stoneforge Masterwork. Now obviously, Coat of Arms is a universal effect, not only just for all your creatures, but all your opponent's creatures as well. But that +1/+1 for each creature that shares a creature type. If you get a bunch of tokens out again, your commander can get huge. And that's the same thing Stoneforge Masterwork is going to do for you. It's going to be an equipment for your commander so that once you have a bunch of goblins out, it starts essentially getting exponential. You're just going to have all these goblins. It's going to be massive. And then you make all these more goblins. It gets even more massive. And essentially, you're almost on that Krenko train again, where just stuff starts growing and getting out of hand. Looking at the instance, there's just 2. The one I really do want to talk about is Rush of Blood. This is kind of a weird combat trick, and again, in Commander, a lot of these one-off combat tricks you're not going to want to run. But the nice thing is, this could really serve as a finisher for a number of reasons. If you can get your commander to a decent size, play this out, it can get huge. You can kill somebody with commander damage, but it also can allow you just to get an insane number of goblins out on a given turn, especially if you get something with the Stoneforge Masterwork or you're doing some tricks with your Mog Raider. There's just a lot of things that can happen, and this is something that can just sneak up out of nowhere and either end the game or put you in a position to do so. Next, looking at the enchantments, there's 8. Both Aggravated Assault and Breath of Fury serve the same general purpose. These cards give you extra combat steps, and in a deck where your commander needs to attack to get that trigger, it is so useful. If you can attack twice, especially if he gets to a decent size, forget about the combat damage you could deal. You're going to make so many goblins, especially with something like Aggravated Assault, where you can, if you have enough mana, keep paying for it, it gets insane. This is something I actually really appreciate as far as a big difference with the old Krenko is, this deck focuses a lot more on the combat step than previous Krenko decks I made. It always used to be, tap one tap shenanigans, Perforos everybody, Impact Tremors everybody, maybe one big combat step. But this deck really does need that combat step, and these cards work great with that. The rest of the enchantments are kind of stuff you'd expect in any really goblin deck, but one I do really need to point out is Price of Glory. I absolutely love this card, especially in a mono red deck. I just mentioned we're only running 2 instants, and to be honest, we're not really doing a lot of instant speed shenanigans. And this is a way to kind of level that out. This is a way to stop all those blue players from doing all their fancy stuff during your turn and just kind of even that playing field. And it does such a good job of that. Now, obviously it gives them the option. They can tap their lands when it's not their turn and sack them if they want. But most of the time, this is just going to turn into, no instant speed shenanigans. And in a deck like this where we're not doing a lot of it, it's great to have a level playing field. Now, looking at the sorceries, there's 4. Really nothing too exciting here. Everything's pretty basic. I just do love the card Gamble, though. Gamble's one of my favorite tutors. I love the chaos along with it, and kind of goes hand in hand with the whole goblin thing. Now, the lands actually get pretty interesting. We're running 36, but now, again, this is kind of a budget thing. If you can't afford to do this, just run basic mountains. It really doesn't matter that much. But I'm running 32 snow-covered mountains, and there's a number of synergies that we can get out of this. Now, with running snow-covered mountains, one, we run a land called Scrying Sheets. This essentially just works as a decent level of pseudo card advantage, which is something just mono red hurts for. So I like getting any little bit of value I can in a mono red deck. Now, when I mention these snow-covered mountains, another popular thing people like to do that I'm also doing this deck is running Extra Planar Lens. Now, the way Extra Planar Lens works, when it comes into play, you exile a land you control. Now, whenever a land with that same name is tapped for mana, you get an additional color. Now, normally with basics, this is a universal effect. But because these basics are snow-covered, it only works for your other snow-covered mountains. Everyone else's mountains don't get affected. So again, you don't need the snow-covered mountains. It's just kind of that little incremental bit of value you can get instead of just running basics. And again, in mono red, I'm going to do everything I can to get any amount of ramp and card advantage I can. So that does it with all the categories. Now we're going to get to the best part. My favorite part. And again, one day, if it's not there yet, one day it's going to be your favorite part, and it is the game-winning step. How are we about to win this game? Again, this is I feel like this has kind of been a theme with some of these decks where it's pretty straightforward. Again, this is goblins. You want to play a lot of goblins and then, benefit from it. It's not too convoluted, but there are just kind of a few cards that get us there best. Number 1, zero surprise to anybody, is Perforos. Perforos, I think in any deck it's in, is the game-winning card in that deck. It is such a powerful card, and the fact that it's indestructible and is an enchantment most of the time, it's so hard to remove. Perforos is just so good, and there's so many ways to make tokens. This is the type of card that if you get it out and no one removes it, you're gonna win. The next way is just make your goblins giant. So this is with cards like Shared Animosity, Door of Destinies, Coat of Arms, or even the Stoneforge Masterwork I mentioned, if you just get one goblin giant, and really just all these team pump effects. The Eldrazi Monument is another amazing one. If you get enough tokens out, you can make these things massive, and you really don't need too many of them out. Really, if you get a Coat of Arms and an Eldrazi Monument with some tokens on the board, the game's going to be over pretty quick. Alright, so now the last way to win the game is kind of a weird combination of things, kind of convoluted, but if you don't know by now, I do like convoluted ways to win the game, and that is with Mana Echoes. So Mana Echoes is a super powerful card. Essentially with Mana Echoes, every time you have a creature enter the battlefield, you get one colorless mana for every other creature that shares a creature type with it. Now with our commander, you could be having, 4 or 5 goblins come in at once. That adds up so fast, and especially with some of the more explosive turns you can have, once you start kind of pumping your team up, you can create an insane amount of mana. So what do we do with all this mana? Well, if you notice when I mentioned the instance earlier, I kind of left off a little card on there that maybe seemed a little bit, notable that I should have talked about, and that is Electro Dominance. Electro Dominance is so good, but especially with this Mana Echoes. Basically how this works is if you're able to get your commander big enough, you can get out a whole bunch of goblins and produce an insane amount of mana with Mana Echoes. This lets you, one, just deal a crazy amount of damage to any target. Essentially, it's not unrealistic to just knock somebody out of the game, and then on top of it, cast a card for free at instant speed. It's just a really powerful effect. And again, it's probably not as straightforward as just, winning with your Perforos or winning with your big combat steps with some of your pumped up goblins. But I love it. Anytime you're making crazy amounts of mana, and that's how you win, and you get to, basically an expo. If you're casting an expo and you win it, you got me. I'm happy. That's what I want to do. So that does it for this week's deck tech. I really hope you like Krenko 10th Street Kingpin as much as I do. I actually do. It inspired me to go back to playing goblins and to put a Krenko deck back together. I'm really excited to get to test it out to see if it's less intimidating than old Krenko was, and maybe a little bit more, player friendly to everybody else at the table, and maybe even a little bit more consistent if he's not as powerful and doesn't get hated out as quick. But either way, if you guys have had a chance to maybe proxy him and try some games, let me know how it went. Let me know some cards that I'm missing, some additions you would make. This is a brand new commander, so there's definitely some synergies I'm missing. Either way, let me know what you think in the comments, and check the full deck list out down there also. Go to our tapped out page, it'll be there, and I will see you guys next time. Struggle, you couldn't give him haste, and you just didn't have a good time. What's up, Barkley? Yes.